Okay, so today's daf is 92. We begin 91b, four lines from the bottom. And if we just go back up a little bit, we're dealing with Shmuel's statement that if one donates wine to the mikdash, then you sprinkle it directly on the fire of the mizbeach. Um, and then, of course, the problem is that you're not allowed to extinguish the fire on the mizbeach. So, doesn't liquid wine isn't that going to extinguish the fire? So that's what we're dealing with. Now we'll start four lines from the bottom, Tashma, in the middle of the line. Let's see. Okay, Tashma. Yayin Kedivu Rabbi Akiva. If you donate wine, so according to Rabbi Akiva, lisfalim, you pour it into bowls. In other words, not directly on the mizbeach. Shemen kedivu Rabbi Tarfon leishim, and oil gets poured according we record with Rabbi Tarfon that says pour it directly onto the fire. So doesn't Rabbi Akiva contradict Shmuel? Shmuel says pour it directly onto the fire. B'yod Tanya, and we have another brisa, yayin nesach l'sfalim. If you have the wine libation, so the nesach is what comes along with an animal korban. You always bring a wine offering with it, and that gets poured into bowls. Maybe that gets poured directly onto the fire. But we say that you're not supposed to extinguish. You can't extinguish the fire on the mizbeach. So therefore, therefore, that's why you don't pour it directly onto the fire. So doesn't that contradict Shmuel? Or says Lokasha, ha Rabbi Yehuda. This price, according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that in general we have a machlokas in all of Shas. It particularly is notable when it comes to Shabbos that something that is a byproduct of what you want to do, an unintentional byproduct, is permitted. So you're not, excuse me, you're not trying to extinguish the fire on the mizbeach. You're trying to offer the wine, and so it's fine according to Rabbi Yehuda. Whereas Rabbi Shimon would say no, that davar she'eino miskavin, something that's not intended, is still forbidden. Ha, Rabbi Shimon. What Shmuel says is. Sorry, Rabbi Shimon would say it's permitted, and Rabbi Yehuda would say it's forbidden. So the Gemara says, well, wait a minute. There's an unintentional. That's if it's not a foregone conclusion. What we call a psik resha. So psik resha is a term which has to do with if you cut off the head of a chicken, will it not die? Right? So if you sever a head, then that may not be your intention to kill the chicken, but the chicken is going to die. It's unavoidable, right? So that's not something that is an unintentional byproduct, right? If it's that much of a foregone conclusion, okay. So the member of the Shmuel Rabbi Shimon's sphere. First of all, we want to ask is that do we want to say that Shmuel holds like Rabbi Shimon? V'amar Shmuel mechabin gachelos shalmatechos b'shus harabim. On Shabbos, you can put out a metal burning piece of metal in the public domain, b'shvil shelo yizoku barabim, so that people don't get injured by it. But not a piece of wood that's burning. Okay, so because the burning metal or glowing hot metal is not really fire, right? The same way that a piece of wood that's on fire is really fire. If you think Shmuel holds like Rabbi Shimon that it's permitted to do something that is unintentional, because your intention is to prevent harm, and then the fire going out is a byproduct. So it should be allowed with the wood burning as well. The Gemara says, "But several Rabbi Shimon, several Rabbi Yehuda." Okay, so there's a fine distinction here. There's two types of things. One is davar shein miskavin, something that's an unintended byproduct, and the other is malacha shein tzricha legufa, work that is not needed for its defined purpose. Um, so, so when it comes to the wine on the mizbeach, right? Then you're trying to do what you're doing, right? Your intention is to put the wine on the fire. When it comes to putting out the wood, you don't care about extinguishing the fire. You care about the removing the danger. Amar Rav Huna, nechasim shenitmeu, nechasim, wine libations for the mizbeach that become tame. Also had maracha bifnei atzman v'sarfon. So what do you do with them? You make a separate fire for them, and you burn them there in the azara. So you can't burn them on the mizbeach because they're tame, but you can't even take them outside of the azara because they're still kodesh. Mishum shenemar, but kodesh ba'is tisharayf. Something that's tame has to be burned in the kodesh, in the azara. Tani lami hachi hadam v'asham v'menachos v'nesachim shenitmu. Any of these substances, blood, oil, mincha, the flour offering, or nesachim, the wine for the libations that became tame. Also in maracha b'fnei asma, make them a separate fire of a sarfan and burn them there. Amarle Shmuel Rav Chana Bagdata. Shmuel said to this Rav Chana, I see be asara, bring me 10 people, ve'emalach kamayu, and I'll say to you, like with them as witnesses, nechasim shenitmu, and nechasim, the libations that became tamei, also in maracha b'fnei asma the sarfan. So there's a lot of insistence on this rule, even though nobody's arguing with it. But it's quite clear that this is the case, that if it becomes tamei, you can't burn it on the mizbeach because it's tamei. You can also not take it out of the azara because it's tamei. Kadshim that are tamei, and you have to burn them right there, just not on the mizbeach. Hanulach kol hatadir. That's the end of the 10th parak, and we continue with the 11th parak. New rule here. Dam chatas shenataz al habeged. So here's a new rule that we haven't encountered before. If you have the blood of a chatas that gets on the clothes, on the clothes of the kohen, then it has to be washed in the azara. Harizaton kipus. It has to be washed. Now, even though when the Torah tells us that, so what is the pasuk? Let's look up the verse here. This is in Tzav. Talking about the chatas. This is the rule of the chatas. And it goes on. The kohen who does the chatas eats it. So it's talking about a chatas which is eaten. Remember, there are different kinds of chatas. Some are burned inside on the inside mizbeach, and they are not eaten by the kohanim. But some are chatos hanechalos, or they are eaten by the kohanim. And then kol asher yigav b'vsaro yikdash, anything that touches it becomes kodesh. V'asher yizem adamal habeged is what we're talking about. If blood gets on clothing, asher yizem allowed to chabes makom kodesh, has to be washed in a holy place in the azara. Uchlicheres asher tibusha bo yishaber. And if something is a clay utensil that cooks it, has to be broken. But if it's a metal pot, then it has to be cleaned and rinsed in water. Okay, so what are we going to do with all this? So Shanamar. So this verse, this passage is talking about, as I pointed out, Chatos and Echolos, chatos that is eaten by the Kohanim. Shenemar Mokom Kadosh Te'achel says it should be eaten. This chatos that we're talking about, from where we get the rule about washing the clothes that blood gets on, it's talking about chatos that gets eaten. So even though that's the case, the rule of washing, having to wash the clothes that get the blood on them, that applies to all chatos, both those which are eaten and those which are burned on the inside mizbeach. Shenamar Torah sachatos, because it says this is the law of the chatos. There's one law. Torachas l'chol chatos. There's one law for all the chatos. This law applies to all chatos, even though even though it's referring to specifically the chatos which gets eaten. Still, there's only one rule for all chatos. Chatos psula ein damaton kibus. If you have a chatos that becomes invalid, its blood does not have to be washed. Whether it was valid at any point or not. What do I mean that it was valid at one point? Shalana. So you have a valid chatas, you're doing it right, and then you kept it overnight, which you're not supposed to do. So it started out as kosher, and then it expired. It became puzzle. Or it became tame. So it started out okay, and then it became tame, or it started out okay, and then it left the boundary of the azara. That's a shasa kosher. It had a valid period, and now it's puzzle. So it's not subject to the law of washing the blood off the clothes. And what do I mean by one that was never kosher? So when you started the avodah, you started the shechita, you did it with a pigul thought, right? That you were going to do it outside the right time or outside the right place. So that was never, from the time that you started the avodah, it was never kosher. Visha kiblu psulim v'zarkos dama, or if disqualified people, did the avoda of the zrika. Okay, so Gemara says dam chatos shenitas. The blood has to be washed out of the clothes. The hatos. Okay, so you wanted to say that the same law applies to every chatos. Afilu chatos of name. What about a bird chatos? Right? Does that also? Does this rule also apply that you have to wash the clothes in the azara? Alamatanya, but we have another brisa. Maybe I would think that bird chatas you have to wash the blood off the clothes. Zos teras chatas. That's an exclusionary word. Like this chatas gets this law and not some other kind of chatas. So what are we excluding? We're excluding the bird chatas. So Amar Shlach Mishum Bar Kapara. 1 second. Amar Kra Tishachet. Benishchatos Hakasu B'daber. And there's a so how do we resolve this kind of contradiction? Because the Torah says Tishachet, the chatos gets slaughtered, and guess what? A bird chatas is not slaughtered in the sense of shchita. Remember, we use malika. We cut from the back of the neck for a bird chatas, which is not shchita. That's called malika. So it's only a chatas which is subject to shchita, which is subject to the washing rule. So Gemara says, why don't you say that the Torah is talking about only those which are eaten? Like you're saying, you're fixing on this word tishachet, that this only applies to things that are to chatos that are slaughtered. Why don't you fix on the word that where the Torah describes this as being eaten? So understand that only the ones that are eaten and not the chatos pnimios. Maybe that's the qualifying detail. It says we're talking about a carbon chatas that is eaten. Maybe it excludes the inside ones. So the Gemara answers Rabbi Rahmana Taras, because we have the word Taras, the only one law. right? Okay, so we're excluding bird chatos, and we're including chatos pnimios, right? All other animal chatos, even the ones that are not eaten. Why don't you also include the chatos of the bird chatos? Because we have the exclusionary word zos, umar isa. Okay, so here's the question: why? How do you decide which one to include and which one to exclude? You're excluding the bird chatos from the washing rule, and you're including the chatos pnimios, the animal chatos that are not eaten. Why don't you do it the other way around? Right? So our answer is mistarba the chatos behema pnimios hava le because it makes more sense to include the other animal chatos shekain behema because it's first of all it's an animal, shlita not a bird, and shlita safa, and then the shlita takes place in the north, which is unlike the bird chatos for kabbalas kli, and you need to catch the blood in a bowl, which is not the case with the bird chatos, which you apply directly to mizbeach for keren, and you apply it to the corner of the mizbeach for etzba, and using your finger rather than directly from the bird, v'chuda, and to the very edge of the corner of the mizbeach, the ishim, and you burn the parts that are to be sacrificed. They're burned on the mizbeach, which is not the case for the bird. So it's more similar. So the chatos pnimios are more similar to the chatos anecholos than the bird chatos is. So Gemara says, "Adrabah chatos of havalela ruye." Well, wait a minute, but there are ways in which the bird chatos is more similar to the chatos anecholos. Shekain chutz kumosa. It's that the blood is applied outside of the azara, like the chatos hanechalos, va'achila kamosa, and you get to eat it like the animal chatos. You eat some of the bird chatos too, so it is also similar to the bird chatos. Why don't you say that? More says hanach nefishim because we have more points where the chatos hanacholos are similar to the chatos hapnimios. There are more similarities than there are to a bird chatos. So that's why we're going to include the chatos pnimios in the washing rule and exclude the bird chatos from the washing rule. Rav Yosef has a different reason to choose which to include and which to exclude. Amakra, as the Torah says, Yochlana. All right. Yochlana, he should eat it. Lezuv lo lacheres. We're applying it to this chatzos which you eat and not to another one which you eat. So the Torah has excluded something from the chatos and nechalos. So the Gemara says, "Well, the Ella Zos Lamali." In that case, what do you need the exclusionary word Zos? Only this one gets the washing rule. You love Zos. If not for that, have Amina Yochlana or Chedekra. I might have thought that you would say that. Yeah, the fact that the Torah says "eat it" is just the way it's a normal way to express yourself. It's not something you can learn something from. Kamash Malan. So it tells us by saying Zos that Yochlena really means only the ones that are eaten, and that's what's meant to exclude. Rabba says, Amar Kra Asher Yizeh. The Torah says, Asher Yizeh Midamal Beged, which was like an extra phrase, right? That which those clothes which get blood on them, the Torah is talking about chatos which are offered through their blood being sprinkled. In other words, the chatos pnimios and not the burnt chatos, which, as we said, doesn't get sprinkled; it gets squeezed against the mizbeach. But don't we have a Mishnah? Even though the Torah is only talking about the chatos and nechalos. So our answer is Leinian Mariko Shtifa. The Mishnah means about the rule of cleaning and rinsing. right? Where you remember we had if it's a metal, if you cook it in a metal utensil, then you have to clean and rinse the pot. So about that, the Torah is talking about chatos and echal, sevelin and kibus, but regarding the rule of washing, asher yizek. That is depending on what gets sprinkled, and so it's the animal chatos and not the bird chatos that gets sprinkled. If that's the case, echad echalos vechad apnimios. Um, so that should include. So why does the Mishnah say both those which are eaten and those which are inside and not eaten? Echad apnimios vechad nechalos mivayle. Should have said both in the inside ones and the eaten ones are eaten, because the according to Rabbah, it's like the pnimios are the main thing here, right? Because in other words, it seems like the main thing we're talking about is chatos apnimios, the inside chatos, and then it also includes those which are eaten. So the Mishnah is backwards. The Mishnah should say it's the pnimios and also the nechalos, which are included. Whereas there's tani echad pnimios ve'echad nechalos. Yeah, okay, fine. Read it that way. We'll reread the Mishnah to accord with what we want it to say. If that's the case, then we also use the word v'hizah with regards to the bird chatos. V'hizah midam chatos al kir hamizbeach. So even though we actually squeeze it, the Torah refers to it as sprinkling. So you should say that the rule to wash the bloody clothes refers to the inner chatas and the bird chatas. They both have hazah written about them. So Gemara answers zos. So we have the word zos, only this. So in that case, don't include the outer chatas. If it's only zos, if it's only this one, in other words, only the one we're talking about, which is the chatas apnimios, so exclude everything else. Now we have the rule, the other word. We're kind of going in circles here. This Torah says that there's one rule, right? So one rule for everything. So you include one, then you exclude the other. Umari says, so why include one and not the other? We have all these six things and ways in which the chatos and nechalos are similar to the chatos apnimios, and not the bird chatos. So adarabah chatos we saw this already. Why don't we include the bird chatos? Because that's also in some ways closer, more like the chatos, the animal chatos. Sheken hazakamosa. Because there's sprinkling, right? Because the Torah refers to hazah, but there's more ways in which the chatas apnimios is similar to the chatas and achalos, more than it's similar to the bird chatas. So, okay, so we've basically used the same logic as we did before. Okay. By Rabbi Yavin. Chatasov shehichnis dama b'tzavara b'fnim mahu. We have a bird chatas that you brought the blood inside the azara while the blood is still in the animal, in its neck. Tzavara klichlisharis damei mifsal. So you're not supposed to bring it inside; it's an outside chatas. Do you consider the neck like a kli? So in other words, so remember that the blood of the bird chatas doesn't go into a kli; it goes directly on the mizbeach. What if you brought it into the azara, which you're not supposed to? Is the neck considered like a kli for the purposes of the bird chatas, and therefore it would become pasul or not? Or then it would still be like the blood that's still in the bird. You haven't taken it out of the bird, and so you can't make it pasul by bringing it into the azara. midama marachman of lo basara. Maybe it's like the neck, like the blood being in the neck of an animal, a mammal, and the Torah says about that midama, from its blood and not from its basar, not from its meat. Okay, so if its blood is still in the meat, it doesn't. It's not like it's not sacramental blood yet. Tashma. Let's see if we can figure it out. Excuse me. Tashma. Pirkasa v'nichnasa lifnim v'chazra. We have a brisa that says if you did the bird chatas, you did the malika, you severed the head, and you haven't sprinkled the blood, squeezed the blood out of the mizbeach, and you took it inside the azara, then you brought it back out. Kshera, still kosher, right? So that's exactly our question. But this brisa is talking about if the bird kind of as you severed its head, it kind of jumps out of your hand or something and enters on its own enters the azara, and then it's brought back. So that's kosher. But ha'hichnisa psula. But that implies that if you did it, right? If the Kohen took it inside, not through its own convulsion, but you brought it into the azara, that would imply it's not kosher. Or it says l'tameh. If that's what you're going to say, gabi kodesh kadshe kadashim diktane. What about animals which are kadshe kadashim? Pirkas aviyatzel adara v'chazra kshera. If it convulsed in the same way and it went out of the part of the azara where it's supposed to be, out of the north part to the south part, and then it was returned to the north, it's still kosher. Would you say hahotzia psula? Does that mean that if the Kohen takes it out of the north side, then it would be puzzle? But that's not the case. Because the avoda has to be done in the north, but there's no restriction on the animal itself, the sacrifice itself being moved to the south. It's just that the avoda has to be done in the north. So there's no issue of. So when the brisa says that the animal convulses, goes to the south, and then is brought back to the north, you're not going to imply from that if you had taken it to the south, it's no good. No, because there's no basis to say that. It's the other brisa because of this other rule where the animal went outside of the azara. That's why the brisa had to say had to talk about use the case of the animal that went out by itself. Okay, and so so here too, the brisa about the bird chatas, we can say that because of the rule that where the bird chatas goes outside of the azara, that's why the brisa had to use the case of a bird that went out by itself. Okay, so you can't get from this brisa that the bird chatas would be invalid if the Kohen brought it into the sanctuary with the blood still in its neck. Rav Avin asked, what if the blood spilled out onto the floor and then you were able to scoop it up into a kli? Can you still do the zrika? Is it is it that the bird chatas doesn't require being put in a kli, but v'hilkach osvo v'kasher, therefore you can, if you do gather it up and put it in a kli, it's still okay. right? In other words, is it that there's no problem with it being put in the Kli, it's just not necessary? Or Dilma Mifsal Pasal, or maybe the Torah is telling you that no, when you have to squeeze the blood directly from the bird onto the Mizbeach, that implies that you are not allowed to use a Kli. So now if the blood spilled on the floor and you put it in the Kli, then it would be Pasal. Let's see if we can figure it out. You might think that the blood of a bird that gets on your clothes has to be washed. In the Azara, Talmud Lomar is Zos. As we saw before, no, Zos, that only the Chatas Behema is subject to that rule. Now, if you want to think that the Torah is disqualifying a Kli for the blood of the bird Chatas, why would I even need that word Zos? Typically, the ha'ifsalei ba'avir kli, like by getting on the clothes, it's now on a kli because the clothing is defined as a kli, right? So now it's puzzle. So it must be that putting it in the kli is not a problem, right? And the only problem is that it got on the clothes and has to be washed. Rabbi Yeshua, the madbik kli b'tzavara. No, it's not a proof because because you'd still need the word Zos, like only this is subject to the rule of washing for the case where you touch the clothes to the neck, right? So the blood never never has an independent existence, right? If the blood goes directly from the neck of the bird onto the clothes, then it doesn't the rule doesn't apply. So even if you could even say that the blood once it's on the kli, it still requires washing. But the word zos tells you that it doesn't require washing when it goes directly from the neck of the bird to the clothing. And we will stop here for today.
Thank you. Thank you.